In last session, we have discussed about HTTP status, codes, and messages. All right, perfect. And the next thing is, guys, that we need to understand how to handle exceptions in the REST API. How can we handle exception in the REST API? Exception handling in REST API. Exception handling in REST API. Alright, now getting exception is very common in every application. Exception means, what is exception? Exception means unexpected and unwanted situation. Exception means unexpected and unwanted situation occurred in the program. When exception occurs, our programs will be terminated abnormally. When exception occurs, our programs will be terminated abnormally. Abnormally means will be stopped in middle. Will stop execution in middle. If programs executed abnormally, it leads to problems. When programs stop, if program got stopped execution in the middle, if a program got stopped its execution in middle, it will leads to so many problems. Okay. Whenever exception occurs, we need to handle the exception, and we need to handle the exception. Whenever exception occurred, then we have to handle that exception. Whenever exception occurred, then we have to handle that exception. Good. Now let's go to our REST API and see the behavior of the REST API whenever exception occurs. Generally in the Java, we will do exception handling by using try, catch, throw, throws, and finally keywords are available. In Java, we will use below keywords. To handle exceptions. In Java, we will use below keywords to handle exceptions. What are the keywords we will use in the Java? Try keyword we will use, catch keyword we will use, try, catch, throw, throws, finally. Try, catch, throw, throws, finally. These are the famous keywords that are there in the Java, which are used to handle the exceptions. What is the meaning of exception? Exception means unexpected, unwanted situation occurring in the program. Exception means unexpected and unwanted situation occurred in the program. When exception occurs, our programs will be terminated abnormally. Abnormal termination means programs will stop the execution in the middle. If a program got stopped its execution in middle, it leads to so many problems. Whenever exception occurred, then we have to handle that exception. In Java, we will use below keywords to handle exceptions. Try, catch, throw, throws, and finally. In Java, we will use below keywords to handle the exceptions. Try, catch, throw, throws, and finally. Okay, let's go and create one simple REST API, guys. Let's go and create one simple REST API and see what is the exception scenario in the REST API, how the REST APIs will behave when the exception occurs. File, new, Spring Starter project. I'm going to create one new project here with a name called 37 Spring Boot REST Exception App. Spring Boot REST Exception App. Okay, click on next. I'm selecting web dependency, dev tools, web dependency, if required Lombok. Not anything extra. Web dependency, dev tools, Lombok. Click on next, click on finish. Click on next and click on finish. I'm selecting this exception. In this exception application, I have selected 3 dependencies, normal dependencies only, web dependency, dev tools dependency, and Lombok. That's it. That's it. Okay. Cool. Go to this. Application got created, guys. Let me create one simple REST controller. Close undeleted projects. Now go to this package. Create one REST controller. Simple demo REST controller I'm going to take. in.ashokit.rest. I'm taking demo REST controller. In order to represent this class as a REST controller, we are going to use @REST controller annotation. In order to represent this class as a REST controller, we are going to use @REST controller annotation. We are going to use @REST controller annotation. All right. Then next one. Here we are going to write one method, public response entity of string, public response entity of string welcome. Okay, cool. Now here I am taking string message is equal to some welcome to Ashok IT. Welcome to Ashok IT. Then I am going to return that message in the form of a response entity object. New response entity of message comma http status dot okay. Response entity of message comma http status dot okay. Perfect. I am returning this http status with okay. That means 200. Return it. No problem. Return it. Now let's bind this method to get request @get mapping. We will go for /welcome. Get mapping /welcome. Is this clear for all of you? Is there any problem in our application now? Is there any problem in our application? Perfect. Go to properties file, server.port. Server.port is equal to 9090. I'm running this application on the port number 9090. I'm running this application on the port number 9090. Right click, run as boot application. Right click, run as boot application. Application started. Go to browser, localhost :9090/welcome. Are we able to access our REST API? there is no problem. Happily we are able to access our REST API. Okay. Now let's assume that, guys, let's assume that in this API some logic we are calling. In this API some logic we are executing. Integer I is equal to 10 by 0. Integer I is equal to 10 by 0. I'm executing some logic. Now send a request. Wow. Are we getting the exception? Are we getting the exception or not? What exception we are getting? Arithmetic exception. Why we are getting arithmetic exception? This dividing by 0. Now what is the status code we are getting? 500. What is the status code we are getting? 500. That means whatever the code that we are executing in the controller, that code was not able to execute properly. That code is giving some exception. Because of that, our program got terminated abnormally. It is displaying exception stack trace to the client. Can end user understand this stack trace? Can end user understand this stack trace? Is it recommended to display error message like this, or we need to convey to the user in the understandable format? We need to convey to the user in the understandable format. That is called exception handling. So what exception is occurring here? Arithmetic exception is occurring. Now I am going to handle that arithmetic exception. Okay, I am going to write public response entity of string handle arithmetic exception. What is that, guys? Handle arithmetic exception. Cop AE. Public response entity handle arithmetic exception. I'm going to handle this arithmetic exception. Okay. Now in this method, what I will do is I will create the response entity with the error details. AE dot get message. What is the reason of this exception? I'm getting that error message. Now here what I will do is return new response entity of error message comma. What we can say? What is the problem? It is failing. Is it a client mistake, or is it server side with the code is not executing? HTTP status dot internal server error. Now when this method should execute, that's where exception handler value is equal to arithmetic exception. Okay, this method is responsible to execute whenever arithmetic exception occurs in the project. Occurs in the controller. In this program, whenever arithmetic exception occurs, then this method should execute. Are you guys getting my point? In this method, whenever arithmetic exception occurs, then this method should be executed. Are you able to follow me? What I am doing here? Error message and status code I am sending. Now send the request. Now error stack trace is, exception stack trace is coming, or only the message is coming? Dividing by 0. It is failing. Instead of that, what I can say? Number dividing by 0. Number should not divide. Number can't be divide. Number cannot divide by 0. Can I write my own message? Number cannot divide by 0. Can I write my own message also? Yes. Now Application is getting restarted. Application is getting restarted. Now send the request. Can you say appropriate error is coming? Earlier, whenever this method is not available, when I send a request for this REST API, what is happening? When I send a request to this REST API, what is happening? Exception stack trace is coming. Is it recommended to send the exception stack trace to the clients? Is this recommended to send this exception stack trace to the client? It is not at all recommended to send exception stack trace to the client. It's not a best practice. Always we need to convert the exception to understandable format. Okay? Now, how can we handle that exception? There is one annotation in the Spring which is called exception handler. Oh my god. Annotation for handling exceptions in the specific handler classes are handler methods. Handler methods which are annotated with this annotation are allowed to have any very flexible signatures. They may have parameters of the following types in the arbitrary order. Now, what is the meaning of this exception handler? Value is equal to arithmetic exception. What I mean to say is, in this REST controller, whenever arithmetic exception occurs, then this method should be called. Spring will take care of that part. So here I have specified exception handler is equal to arithmetic exception. What is the meaning of that? In this REST controller, whenever arithmetic exception occurs, then this method should be called, will be executed automatically. Now save this program and send a request. Is that executing or not? There is an annotation called exception handler. For that we will specify when this method should be executed, for which whenever exception occurs, which method should be executed, for which exception this method should be executed, that we are going to specify by using one annotation called exception handler. Are you able to understand? Now I am removing this line, guys. Now here I am doing string s is equal to null value. I am doing s dot length. What exception will occur now? Arithmetic exception or null pointer exception? Null pointer exception will occur. Now whenever the null pointer exception occurs, this method will be executed or this method will not be executed? This method will be executed or this method will not be executed? It will not be executed. Why this method will not be executed? This method is responsible to handle only arithmetic exception, not the null pointer exception. Now check this, clear the console. Oh, the method is executing or the method is not executing? Method is not executed. Then what is happening? Whenever we sent a request to the /welcome, then this method got executed. S is equal to null value. We are performing some operation on the null value, then we will get a null pointer exception. But is there any handler for null pointer exception? There is no handler for the null pointer exception. Do we have any handler for the null pointer exception in our program? We don't have any handler for the null pointer exception in our program. We don't have any handler for the null pointer exception. Now, can I create one method which will handle null pointer exception? Can we write one method to handle null pointer exception also? How can we do that? Simply, I will take this method, I will keep it. Exception handler value is equal to null pointer exception. Null pointer exception handle, null pointer exception handle NPE, which is a null pointer exception. Handle NPE, which is a null pointer exception. Now don't perform operation on null. Don't perform operation on null. Don't null operations on null, operation not allowed on null. operation on null is not allowed. Now I have written one method which is responsible to handle null pointer. That means in this program, whenever null pointer exception occur, then this method will execute. In this program, when arithmetic exception occurs, then this method will execute. Are you clear with this one? Now check it. Clear the console. Send a request. Operation on the null is not allowed. Are we able to handle the exception in the REST controller? Do I need to call these methods manually? Spring will call these methods based on the exception handling. Do I need to call these methods, or Spring is calling these methods? Spring is calling. Why Spring is calling? Because of this annotation. What is that annotation? Exception handler. Exception handler. Exception handler value is equal to null pointer exception. That means I am telling that whenever null pointer exception occurred, then this method should be executed. Whenever arithmetic exception occurred, then this method should be executed. Are you able to follow this? Okay. Now guys, I have one more requirement. Okay. Let me create one more REST controller. Let me create one more REST controller, which is called as greet REST controller. Another REST controller I am creating, which is called as greet REST controller. I am representing this as a REST controller by using what? @REST controller. Here also, here I am writing one method. Here I am writing one method. Public response entity of string greet message. Public response entity string greet message. String message is equal to good evening. Good evening. Then I'm going to specify return new response entity of message comma http status dot OK. Response entity of message comma http status dot OK. Now here I'm going to specify @get mapping of /greet. /greet. Get mapping /greet. Perfect. Perfect. Now here I will do one thing. Integer I is equal to 20 by 0. Integer I is equal to 20 by 0. Can I access the greet method now? Can I access the greet method? Will it execute successfully? It will be terminated abnormally. It will execute successfully, or it will be terminated abnormally. Exception is occurring. So what exception is occurring? What exception is occurring? Arithmetic exception is occurring. Do we have a logic to handle the arithmetic exception? Do we have exception handler method? Now check it. Check it. /greet. /greet. Oh, what happened? Exception handler method is executing. Or exception handler method not executing now? Prashant, tell me. Exception handler method is executing. Exception handler method is not executing. Exception handler method is not executing. But we have a method to handle that arithmetic exception. Na? Here there is a method to handle arithmetic exception. Is this method is executing or this is not executing? Not executing. Now see here. Let me uncomment this line. Integer I is equal to 10 by 0. It is in the welcome. It is in the welcome. Send a request for /welcome. What happening? Number cannot divide by 0. Number cannot divide by 0. So is it working for welcome REST controller? Is it executing for welcome REST controller? So whenever I send a request for the welcome REST controller, arithmetic exception is occurring, then this method is getting executed. Now I'm sending request for greet REST controller, not executing. Now guys, apply your common sense. What is our understanding now. Apply your common sense. For greet rest controller, whenever arithmetic exception occurring, that method is not executing. But whenever arithmetic exception occurred in the welcome rest controller, that method is executing. Q. This is called class level exception handling. Whatever the method we are writing here, this is applicable for only for this class. This is called class level exception handling. Within this class, if arithmetic exception occurs, then only this method will be executed. Then only this is executing. Now guys, tell me, arithmetic exception we will get only in one class, or we can get that exception from multiple classes also? Arithmetic exception we will get in only one class, huh? Or is there a chance that we can get that exception from multiple classes also? Multiple classes also. Now tell me, in every class I will write this method, huh? Do I need to write this method in every class? Now, I have written this method in the greet controller. Tomorrow I have another 10 controllers. In every controller, is it recommended to write like this? Not recommended. Then what we should do? What we should do? We need to handle the exceptions globally. We need to handle the exceptions globally. How to handle the exception globally? That's where I'm going to create one more class called global exception handler. What is that class, guys? Global exception handler. I'm going to create that in the another package called exception package, global exception handler. Within the global exception handler, I will keep these methods. I will not keep in the controller. If I keep those methods within the controller, then they are applicable for only for that particular controller. Do you want to handle the exception in only one controller, or you want to handle the exception in any controller? Do you want to do local exception handling, or you want to do global exception handling? Do you want to do local exception handling, or we need to do global exception handling? We need to do global exception handling. In order to do the global exception handling, I am creating a separate class called global exception handler. How to represent this class as a global exception handler? This should be applicable for entire application. That's where we are going to write one annotation called @rest controller advice. What is the name of the annotation, guys? @rest controller advice. Then this global exception handler will work whenever exception occurred in the project, entire project, not for only one controller or two controllers. Throughout the application, in the entire project, whenever null pointer exception occurs, then this method will execute. Whenever arithmetic exception occurs, then this method will be executed. Now, do you understand how to handle the exception globally? Now, do you understand how to handle the exception globally? Now, check it. In the greet rest controller, I have arithmetic exception scenario. In demo rest controller, I have null pointer exception scenario. Now, let's try this. Clear the console. Localhost :9090/greet. Is it working now? Is it working now? When I send a request for greet, is it working now? Yes. Now, go and send a request for /welcome. Is it working now? So, in the demo rest controller, I am getting null pointer exception. In greet rest controller, I am getting arithmetic exception. But where is the logic available for handling those exceptions? In the global exception handler class. How to represent this is a global exception handler? Rest controller advice, that is a annotation. Rest controller advice. A convenience annotation that itself is annotated with the controller advice. Types that carry the annotation treated as a controller advice where exception handler method assumes semantics by default. Okay, if you want to handle the exceptions in your application globally, then you will create one handler class and you will use @REST controller advice, and you will specify the handler methods by using exception handler. This annotation will represent your class is global handler class. So which exceptions you want to handle, for that you are going to write the methods. Handler methods you are going to write. Exception handler. Whenever null pointer exception occurs, this method should execute. Whenever arithmetic exception occurs, then this method should execute. Are you guys able to follow this? If you are able to understand, then I will go to the next topic. If you are able to follow this, I will go to the next topic. Understood? Try, catch, throw, throws finally. Right, now in REST API we can handle the exception in two ways. In REST API we can handle exception in two ways. In REST API we can handle exception in two ways. One is controller based exception handling. One is controller based exception handling, and second one is global exception handling. One is controller based exception handling, second one is global exception handling. Can anyone tell me what is controller based exception handling? Can anyone tell me what is controller based exception handling? Controller based exception handling? If you write the exception handler methods within the controller, then it is called as controller based exception handling. If we write exception handler method, within controller class, then it is called as controller based exception handling, and it will handle exception occurred only in that controller. Read my statement. In REST API we can handle exception in two ways. First one is called controller based exception handling, and the second one is called global exception handling. If we write exception handler method within controller class, then it is called as controller based exception handling. It will handle exception occurred only in that controller. Okay, now this is the example. Okay, now I will take this scenario. I'm taking one REST controller. In this REST controller, I'm taking this one exception handling logic. If we want to handle the exceptions in the entire application, then we need to go for global exception handling. String message is equal to operation is not allowed on the null value. Operation is not allowed on null. I'm passing that as a response message. This is the example which is used to work with controller based exception handling. This is example used to work with the controller based exception handling. If we want to handle exceptions globally in our application, then we will create REST controller advisor class. If we want to handle exceptions globally, if we want to handle exceptions globally, then we will create one handler class using @REST controller advice like below. If we want to handle exceptions globally, then we will create one handle class using REST controller advice like below. Now go to our handler class. Go to our handler class. Now I will specify this as message, string message. String message. Operation on the null is not allowed. I will specify this as my message. Number cannot divide using 0. This is my response message. String message is equal to number cannot divide using 0. Number cannot divide. Number cannot be divided by 0. Number cannot be divided by 0. So like this, we can create one REST controller advice to handle exceptions globally. That means whenever, now with this example, what will happen in your project, in whichever the class, if you get null pointer exception or if you get arithmetic exception, then this class is going to execute. When null pointer exception occurs in any class, then this method will execute. When arithmetic exception occurred in any class, then this one will execute. Now let me keep it as a method 1 and let me keep it as a method 1. Let me keep it as a method 1. Now let me keep this as method 1. I will write a point. This is M1 method. Let me take it as a or else. Now handle null pointer exception and handle arithmetic exception. In the entire project, guys, in the entire project, in any class, whatever the class it is, if a null pointer exception occurs in your project, then first method will execute. If arithmetic exception occurred, then second method will be executed. Are you guys clear with controller based exception handling and global exception handling? Are you guys clear with controller based exception handling and global exception handling in the REST API? Yes, in the REST API, we can handle the exception in two ways. One is by using controller based handling and the second one is global exception handling. If we write the exception handler method within controller class, then it is called as controller based exception handling and it will handle exception occurred only in that controller. If we write this annotation with the one controller class, then it is called as controller based exception handling and it will handle exceptions occurred only in that particular controller, like this. So within the demo REST controller, I have written this method. Whenever null pointer exception occurs within that class, then only that handler will execute. But in the real time, null pointer exceptions are quite common in every Java class. Can you write this method in every Java class? Difficult. So that's why what we will do, we will go for global exception handling. We will go for global exception handling. How to do global exception handling? By using REST controller advice, we will can handle exceptions globally. Okay, got it. Now, someone is asking a question. You are here, you are keeping string, here you are keeping empty. Man, whenever you are declaring first time, you need to keep the generic type. Whenever you are creating the object, you don't need to keep that generic type. If you want here also, you can keep it, but not required. If you want here also, you can keep it, but it is not required. Got it? Already I have specified the response entity is a string type. Even if I don't specify here, that's no problem. No problem. Okay? Core Java. People are weak in core Java. You got my point?